Hey everyone, and welcome to the Pisgah Podcast. Thank you for listening to Pisgah. I'm your host, Drew, and unfortunately Mangler is having some trouble with his voice after a week of yelling at the kids to get off his lawn, and he's going to be mad when he finds out that I'm recording live from his lawn. So, yeah. This past week was a nice, dry, and warm time to be out on your bike, so I hope everyone did. And for this week's news updates, we got this weekend coming up at Windrock will be the Tennessee National. As many of us have noted on social medias, there are lots of heavy hitters riding the rock in preparation this week. It's pretty safe to say that this is going to be a World Cup level event as far as the competition goes. And I'm going to be out there repping the Pisgah Podcast, so when you see the short, sketchy guy running around with a microphone, definitely come by and say hey, and I will give you a sticker. Also in news, you might have noticed that the air is a little bit smoky in some areas of the forest. We currently have prescribed burns in the Ranger District over in Mitchell County, in the Nantahala Forest over in Macon County, as well as the Grandfather District up in Burke County, and also DuPont State Forest. So these burns are totaling over 5,000 acres, which is quite a bit of land, and it's generating a lot of smoke in the air, but it's making the forest safer for preventing forest fires and invasive species and undergrowth and all kinds of things that we really just were better off without, so burn it. This episode is going to be a little bit different than most. For one, we don't have our buddy Mangler here with us, but this week's feature, we have the tale of an epic adventure crossing the Blue Ridge. We're calling this Story Time with the Pisgah Podcast. For this grand adventure, Mangler sat down with Asheville-based writer Graham Averill, his neighbor to the west side of town and photographer Derek DeLuzio, and ex-Pisgah #1 stunner Evan Voss, who now resides over in Bellingham, Washington. These three took on an amazing adventure back in the fall of 2014 for a feature for the now deceased Bike Mag.
Kind of idea was story time, and since we are no longer having Bike Mag as one of our great publications, Graham, you wrote a really cool article a couple years ago about circumventing around Pisgah and bike packing. Do you remember when this was published?
I was actually going to ask Derek because the spine of my issue is totally toast.
I've got September, October of 2015.
So you guys did this in summer, probably?
No, we did this the year before. We did this in the fall of 2014 then.
Ah, okay. Bikes were a lot different back then, and as far as bike packing gear goes, what was your setup like?
Primitive is what our setup was like. At least I'm trying to think back to mine was a very heavy pack, a crappy handlebar bag, and I think maybe a seat post bag. I think I had a seat post bag back then, and that was about it. I can't remember what you guys were rocking.
Evan, you've got a lot of backpacking experience, so what was your setup like?
Yeah, I think I was running like a 40-liter Kelty backpack, like a small medium size, and then I think Derek hooked me up with this like extendable seat bag that like strapped under the seat where you could like kind of jerry it to work with a dropper post. But I did not have one of those handlebar bags because those like kind of like weirded me out having stuff on the front of the bars.
And Derek, you had a lot extra going on. So not only did you have to carry your life supplies, you were challenged with documenting this with your fancy photo equipment.
Yeah, that's right. I distinctly remember having just about the exact same setup as Graham, with the exception that I had my camera gear in my backpack and I had my tripod strapped to my handlebars with my sleeping bag wrapped around it so it wouldn't kind of go through my collarbone if I wrecked or anything like that, But these fellows were gracious enough, I remember, to carry, I think, a little bit more of the food and a couple of the essentials so that I could wrestle a, Canon 1DX and a bunch of, flashes and God knows what else up the mountain.
I chose not to help Derek because I had to carry my own notebook and pen, and nobody offered to help with that.
Those are very heavy items, and I totally understand that, Graham. Totally justified.
I think it came down like to the very end where we were in the parking lot and Derek was like, "Hey, you got to carry this because I can't." I was like, "Well, okay, I'm here. I guess I'll carry this up for you." We're going to need a tent in a little bit, so I guess I'll carry that.
That's right. The shelter was exactly the piece that I dropped on you last moment. Thank you for that.
Oh. So, Derek, you literally made Evan carry your tent at the last minute.
Yeah, well, we were sharing the tent. So
Oh, okay.
luckily, we were in it together.
And Graham, you had your own tent?
Yeah, I had my own tent, and then of course we only used that for one night of the trip. But yeah, I don't think we were all going to squeeze in Derek's tent.
How did the idea of this trip come about?
I had done a bike packing story through Pisgah for Bike Magazine a few years before this, but it was through the Pisgah Ranger District. And I wanted to sort of piece together a ride that showcased these much less ridden trails, like, these really great downhills that were never crowded. And I just kept looking at it, and I've always wanted to be able to piece together, connect Kitsuma and Heartbreak with Big Ivy, which if you look at it on the map, they're like right next to each other. They're a couple of miles across from each other along the Blue Ridge Parkway. It should be a no-brainer, but there's no bike trail, no legal bike trail from the Parkway into Big Ivy, even though that section of National Forest butts up against it. And so to do it, you got to do a bushwhack. And I was pretty sure nobody else had even bothered to do that before. So I just thought it would be a really great idea if we could get it done with some style.
Obviously, you probably reached out to Derek. And Derek, what were your thoughts on this endeavor?
I think, well, my thought was all go. I was super excited on the project, quite frankly. I mean, I think, and we'll probably get into this a little bit later, I think I underestimated a little bit of what we ended up climbing and descending a little bit, just from the fact that at that time I'd been living locally here for about a year to a year and a half. So I'd ridden quite a bit around, but not to the extent where we were piecing together bushwhacks with full day rides and terrible weather and that sort of thing. So I think I was a little naive going into it, but I was super excited. And, partially, mainly because Graham, I think, has amazing ideas and amazing just sort of like maps in his mind of just incredible trips in general. And then also the other piece was, it was my first time photographing a feature for Bike Magazine. So that to me was like one of the most, amazing opportunities I could have had, professionally as well. So, but yeah, I was all go. And I think it kind of settled in a little bit when I started asking around who might want to come with us. And not many people signed up, except for Evan.
So, Evan, you took the bait on this one. But I feel like you probably knew a little bit about what you were getting yourself into.
Yeah, as far as like physical effort of what was going to happen, I was pretty aware of how that was going to go down and what kind of pain cave we were going to get into. But the part that I was not prepared for was the weather aspect of it, which was that shook me to the core pretty good.
It was not ideal. I think when we were driving when Derek came to pick us all up in his truck and we're setting out for the trip, and we're looking at the forecast. Day one, I feel like was fairly dry to begin with, and then we're looking at the forecast and it looks like crap. But Derek said, he was fairly naive about what was going to happen. I feel like that is the perfect state for these kind of adventures, naivety, and you have to just have like unbridled optimism that it's going to work out. The weather's going to change. You're going to be just fine. And that's what we told ourselves as we were driving to the trailhead on day one. And that is not what happened at all.
It's going to be a great time, guys. Come on, let's go.
It's going to be awesome.
I think like that trip probably is like, now I check the weather before I do activities and plan trips. Like before then, like leading up to that trip, I'm like, yeah, we don't need to check the weather. We'll be fine. It couldn't be that bad. Now I check the weather. And give it like its credit where it's needed.
Here's my issue with checking the weather. If you check the weather in the Southern Appalachians, you'll never do anything, because the weather it looks shitty on the outset every single day during the spring, summer, and fall. Like it's gonna thunderstorm and rain every day.
Every day.
If you believe the weather.
If you believe the weather.
Yeah.
But if you know Pisgah, you know it's going to do that somewhere in the area. And Graham and Derek, you guys don't have a good track record of dry photo shoot pursuits, do you?
No. We prefer to shoot in the pouring rain.
Everything goes so well with our jobs together. I don't know what you're talking about.
I've never pedaled across Asheville in the pouring rain with you guys. Never.
Never.
Graham, are you up for kicking in and like doing some reading for us?
I'll give it a go. It's been a while since I've done any spoken word. So just let me know how jazzy you want me to get with this. I'm just looking at the title because I don't remember what it was called. It's called Outer Limits. Okay. First, the world turns white and loud and hot, like an oppressive heavy heat. Then things get small and smaller and smaller. This is what it feels like just before you pass out. I feel my shoulder slip from its socket as the bike tumbles onto my back and head. There's just enough time to yell something obscene before everything around me goes white. I try to stand up, but end up slumping over in the middle of the trail. Or maybe I'm lying down. I don't know. Everything around me is so goddamn bright, I can't focus. It's so loud, too, like a constant, thick, all-encompassing hum. This isn't how I thought the ride would end, but maybe I should have known all along. There's so many signs that the trip was doomed from the beginning. The idea for the ride is bold. Link together a handful of the biggest downhills in North Carolina's Pisgah National Forest, Kitsuma, Heartbreak Ridge, and the gnarly descents in Big Ivy via a 3-day bikepacking trip that would include a little bushwhacking and a night spent in a cave. It has a big adventure feel to it, but it's all in my backyard, maybe 30 miles from my front door. The multi-day, self-supported trip would have leg-burning climbs and burly descents, all of which are hidden in the lesser-known track of Pisgah that surrounds Mount Mitchell, the highest peak east of the Mississippi. While throngs of mountain bikers head to the trails outside Brevard, North Carolina, some of the longest downhills in Pisgah go practically untouched on the eastern edge of the forest. Kitsuma and Heartbreak get a little love, but Big Ivy, a large swath of forest with hidden caves and pockets of old growth, has been left mostly to the equestrians and bear hunters. And I don't think anyone has ever tried to connect all three of these systems into a single ride. The mandatory mile-long bushwhack probably keeps people away. I can't even convince my usual riding buddies to join me. They're all getting older, and the idea of sleeping in a cave doesn't appeal to them anymore. Plus, the weatherman is calling for tornadoes. Luckily, Derek DeLuzio and Evan Voss are still young enough to be game for shit like this. Derek is a photographer who does a lot of work for bike companies like Cane Creek, and Evan is a standout on the local enduro scene. They're not even all that worried about the guys carrying guns at the trailhead at the beginning of day one. It's a family of bear hunters, a dad and his 2 sons, piling out of a big F-150 with empty dog cages in the bed. They're wearing bright orange hats and Carhartts and toting rifles. Dogs treat a bear, the dad says, before disappearing into the woods with his sons. 3 minutes later, we hear a loud shot. then more barking and more gunshots. This is the trouble with riding bikes in Pisgah during the fall. The foliage is charming, but the forest is full of hungry dogs and dudes with itchy trigger fingers. I wish my kit were brighter.
Yeah, that sets a strong emphasis on what day one's looking like for you guys.
Nothing but roses, really.
Nothing but roses. Yeah, it's funny when people who either come up from the big cities and stuff like that to Pisgah and they pull into a Trailhead parking lot or something and there's like dudes with guns. People just don't know how to react to it sometimes. There's like me and Evan definitely grew up in the country.
Country.
So we're used to seeing it. So it's interesting for you to paint that scene that a lot of people might not be accustomed to seeing.
Yeah, and what is still strange to me, even though I grew up around guns, what is still strange to me is that we occupy the same space.
Yeah.
You know, like that the bear hunting was going on very close to where we were riding throughout this entire time. That's what is a little unsettling sometimes. I'm not saying they shouldn't be there. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying you need to be aware of that when you're riding your bike through the woods.
Oh, yeah. And one thing people need to be aware of when it comes to bear hunting is sometimes it's not the guns you need to be worried about. It's the packs of dogs that are potentially going to be running a bear across the trail or forest road at you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the dogs do all the hard work.
Yeah. I don't even want to go down that road right now because that'll get me all sorts of excited and fired up. Evan, pulling into the parking lot and about to go on this endeavor, what were the thoughts going through your head?
Probably just excitement, man. Getting to go on a trip with Derek and Graham. And, I know Derek was excited because, this was his first big bike magazine shoot. And same with me. I was trying to get exposure wherever I could. So it was like a big opportunity. And it was probably just like a nervous excitement. Like, we need to get some awesome shots here. And that was where I was at in the parking lot, and a lot changed after that. But that was initially where we were at, or where I was.
Derek, what about you? How were your thoughts when you were loading up?
Well, you have to remember bear hunting was a big piece of the pitch to Bike Magazine. I mean, that was the forefront of sort of the color I think we were trying to capture. And I mean, it happened before I could even step foot out of my vehicle, in the parking lot. So I was so excited and also trying to think of, okay, how can I capture these hunters, leaving the parking lot, but not be too invasive with me just blatantly taking pictures of them, walking off into the forest with, rifles and their entire kit, So
Yeah.
I kind of hid behind some bikes and just snapped away. They didn't really blink at it, but man, I was just so excited because I knew that right out of the gate we had a big piece of the story in the bag.
Right.
I had no idea that the bear thing was like a part of the sell-in to the story.
I don't remember that either.
Well, I think it was just a kind of a side, like maybe like a note in the pitch. And when I read a pitch, I'm immediately like, okay, what story are we looking to tell? And if there's mention of that, I'm trying to capture it,
Yeah.
And I expected, to maybe hear some gunshots out in the forest at most. I didn't expect to rub shoulders with them by any means,
Well, and it's not often that you're actually around when they tree a bear.
Yeah.
But when you are, you know it.
Yeah, totally.
And they treed that bear and got it. I think an important thing to note is they treat it and we heard them get it. And that was like, probably on the same trail that we were about to come down.
Yeah, you're right.
Because that was the first day. That's when we were doing Kitsuma.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
we started at the bottom of it. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yep.
Wow. So it was like right there at the bottom parking lot of Kitsuma.
Yep.
Right there.
Lazy dogs. Just
Yeah, they didn't
working the terrain right next to the parking spot.
work smarter, not harder, right?
Heavy fog obscures the views as we climb Old 70, a broken piece of pavement that cuts through steep, kudzu-covered slopes. Black walnuts cover the road, cracking beneath our tires. We're carrying 3 days of food and all of our camping gear in backpacks and seat post bags, and it takes a couple of miles to get used to pedaling with the added weight. It's a boring 5-mile grind, so we talk about the depressing Nora Jones weather we're having and spirit animals. Evan's spirit animal is an orca. I'm worried my spirit animal is that dead bear back at the trailhead. Within an hour, we're hitting dirt at the base of Kitsuma, a storied piece of single track that traverses Young's Ridge just outside the tiny town of Black Mountain. The trail begins on the edge of Interstate 40, with just a thin fence separating us from the semis and minivans barreling east and west. Some jackasses use the trailhead as a de facto trash dump, throwing couches and the occasional oven into the ravine near the parking lot. We pedal around a hobo camped at the trailhead, waiting to hitch a ride to Tennessee, and then the climbing begins immediately via a series of switchbacks that don't quit until we've logged a mile and hit the top of the ridge. You can hear traffic the whole way. As soon as you crest the mountain and dip onto the other side, it's quiet. Some color pops through the dense fog, but there's no chance to gaze at the wonders of fall because the rest of Kitsuma is a narrow, bench-cut piece of heaven that runs 2.8 miles, dropping 1,600 feet in the process. For most of the descent, you're cruising along 16-inch wide dirt, perched atop a steep drop-off. The exposure is sickening. Make a tiny mistake, and the best-case scenario is a tree breaks your fall. Today, Kitsuma is slick and punctuated with deep chocolate mud puddles. Occasionally, there's a speed-killing switchback when the added weight on the seat post whips my tail around farther than I'd like, but mostly it's a full-throttle mud dance until we hit the bottom.
So, question. So, you guys parked at the bottom of Kitsuma, did a Kitsuma lap, and then continued on from there. Why did you not just leave all your stuff at the car?
For the
Shots,
purity,
man.
That's right. For the shots and for the purity of the article.
I was thinking about that. I was like, wait a minute. They're just doing Kitsuma. They got all their shit with them.
Oh yeah, I think did we stop back by the car when we finished Kitsuma?
There's no way we had like full bags knowing that.
I don't know.
Maybe we did.
I bet we did. I bet I did, yeah.
I distinctly remember, I feel like 2 days before the trip, Graham was like, yeah, we're just going to park at Kitsuma, ride Kitsuma, and go up Heartbreak. And I paused. I said, you know what? I don't want to ride up that road at the end of this trip. Let's drive to the bottom
Yeah.
and knock out the road to begin with.
That was a good call.
That was a very good call, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Not for the reason that I was kind of pitching towards you, but for a different reason.
Yeah, I definitely think it's always better to get Old 70 out of the way first and not later.
I looked at that picture of, it's like a black and white, I think, of us pedaling up Old 70.
Mm-hmm.
Those packs look pretty full.
Oh, they're
Yeah,
full.
man.
That's pretty nasty looking.
Well, and then we wouldn't have gotten that picture if we would have cheated.
Yeah,
know?
we did
Cheaters.
not cheat.
Cheaters never prosper.
Zero cheating in this trip. That's for
Zero cheating.
You know, an interesting thing on that section that Graham just read was he made note of an orca being my spirit animal.
Yeah.
And those live in the water now, like 30 minutes from my house, which is a bizarre prophecy.
No
I
way.
thought about that. Yeah. I was
Yeah.
like, oh. So, Graham, you set up Evan's prophecy right there in
Yeah.
those words.
What was your connection or reasoning behind orcas being your spirit animal? I don't remember.
Probably just because they were called killer whales, and that sounded pretty sick.
That's a good nickname for a bike rider. Evan the Killer Whale.
Evan
Killer
Orca
whale.
Voss.
Oh, it's better than Graham Dead Bear.
Yeah, it is.
Graham Dead Bear.
We booked it up the country road that connects Kitsuma to Heartbreak, passing a fake geyser named after a Southern Railroad tycoon from the 1800s, and cross a set of train tracks before we push our bikes up Heartbreak. Most people shuttle this trail. I've humped it from the bottom before, but never with a loaded pack and seat post bag weighing down me and my bike. We have at least 3,000 feet to climb before we hit our campsite, and we have to work for every single foot. Halfway up the climb, the forest shifts from green to yellow. There's a carpet of pink on the trail from the tiny leaves that have already fallen from the trees. Fall starts early at higher elevations, and we're heading to the roof of the eastern United States, 6,684 foot high Mount Mitchell. Heartbreak has plenty of those classic tangled root gardens that Pisgah is famous for, like spaghetti spreading over the entire trail. We pedal some, but with our bikes and packs, it's a tough slog, so we end up pushing the steeper parts. It's quiet, except for the occasional gunshot rattling through the trees. During a miserable push through a section that has turned into a 3-inch deep pond, Derek tells us about a shot he used to drink in college called tequila suicide. In his version, you first take a shot of tequila, then you squirt a lime wedge in one eye, then you rub salt in your other eye. The theory is those last two things are so bad, the tequila kind of tastes good, he says. I'm worried that this trip is going to be like that shot. This first part seems bad until we hit the rest of it.
Wow, Derek, setting up right there.
One of my best friends out west, his name's Bone Crusher. He would routinely take those shots.
I mean, with a name like
bar.
Bone Crusher, I would expect that.
Nicest guy you'd ever meet. But boy, he could crush bones.
I just regret that we did not have tequila, limes, and salt on this trip.
Yeah.
Like, that's poor planning on my part. If I would have known, Derek, that this was a touch point for you, I would have planned for this.
Yeah.
The Blue Ridge Parkway is a 2-lane blacktop that undulates for 469 miles along the tallest mountains in the southeast, connecting Shenandoah National Park with Great Smoky Mountains National Park. It's a roadie's wet dream, and I see why as we pedal a fast couple of miles between the top of Heartbreak and the bottom of Mount Mitchell, catching sweeping views to the west, where Mitchell is poking out of the clouds on the horizon. The final push of the day follows Route 128 as it climbs from the parkway to the top of Mitchell via 4 miles of impossibly steep pavement through a high alpine evergreen forest. Big gray boulders with patches of moss are scattered throughout the forest floor. Mitchell has all the trappings of a well-developed state park, including a restaurant near the summit. The goal is to make it to the top of the mountain before that restaurant closes, so we can get coffee and chili and a hamburger and a Coke and French fries. It's getting dark and cold, and a steady wind is whipping through our soaked jerseys. We fall into the rhythm of a granny gear climb, and after about a mile, we separate, Evan pulling ahead and Derek falling behind. Then the fog rolls in, thick and disorienting, like a scene from a horror movie. It takes everything I have to keep pedaling, my quads turning to knots. The wind is so strong as I pedal into the restaurant parking lot, I can't keep my bike pointed in a straight line. I'm too tired to fight it, so I hop off my bike and push, head down. The rain, which started halfway up the climb, pounds my helmet and shoulders. The restaurant is an oasis, a cheesy tourist trap that sells stuffed penguins, but an oasis. Evan has a table next to a giant wall of glass that overlooks the side of the mountain. You can probably catch the sunset most days, but today it's dark and foggy, so all we can see is the rain hitting the glass. I hold a cup of coffee with 2 hands and shiver as I order one of everything on the menu. At the table next to us, some tourists from Ohio are angry about the weather. The kids keep saying, "I hate North Carolina." Our waiter, Greg 2 Chains, because he has 2 thick silver chains around his neck, says they may have to shut down early because of the tornado warnings. He laughs at us when we tell him we're camping. 2 Chains has a point. It's a shitty night to camp. We spend about an hour at the campsite trying to get a fire going in the wind. Derek's determined, but I think it's pointless, so I focus on drinking whiskey from my flask. At some point, as the wind whips through our rainfly stakes, we decide that Mount Mitchell is a Cherokee word meaning inhospitable mountain. That night, I dream about sitting in a bar, eating chicken wings, and watching Monday Night Football.
That sounds like a rough venture up to the top of Mitchell.
It's a shitty climb on a road bike, right? Because it comes at the end usually from a long slog from Asheville. It's an even shittier climb on a mountain bike, and even shittier when you're carrying all that weight, and then even shittier when it's raining on you and the wind is trying to blow you off the road. It was not a good way to finish the first day.
In some ways, it wasn't, but then you had like coffee and one of everything off the menu.
Yeah.
So it could have been worse. It could have been closed.
And I remember really liking 2 Chainz. Like, I had forgotten about him for the last 5 years of my life, but reading this again, I can see him plain as day now. And he thought we were idiots, but I loved him for it.
Oh man, I remember that climb being the point that almost broke me because, man, I remember I'd been up to the top of Mount Mitchell before that, but in a vehicle, and I remember it I had remembered at that point it being a very easy, quick drive, like no big deal. So I remember after climbing Heartbreak, we got to the sign, we all kind of stopped, had some water, you know, and we're like, all right, well, let's just knock out this last little section. And man, I remember when you guys disappeared in the road ahead around that bend, and I said, all right, well, I'll just keep trudging along. And boy, I think I counted 4 or 5 pickup trucks that it took all my will to not throw out my thumb and just hitch up the road. But I was so close, and I never did. I pedaled all the way up that damn road, and I don't think I ever will again on any bike. Ever.
Ever?
No.
Dude, what was that? Like, I've never driven up to the top of Mount Mitchell in a car. I've never been up to the top other than on that trip. And I remember, you know, turning off the Blue Ridge Parkway and going up that last little bit, being like, okay, looking at the time, being like, all right, we're not gonna make dinner. That place is gonna close, and I am so hungry. And homeboys they're not looking great right now, and I gotta eat. So
Homie got to eat.
I gotta eat, and those guys, I was like, all right, well, I gotta leave these guys, and I have to go get food and like beg these people to keep the restaurant open until my friends get here, who are also gonna be very hungry.
And here's what's great about this, and I don't think it's not in the magazine, it's not in the article. We didn't bring food for night one.
Yeah,
like we were counting on making it before the restaurant closes, and if we didn't, we either weren't going to eat that night or we weren't going to eat our second night. So we didn't have a backup plan. That restaurant was plan A and plan B.
It was the only plan.
It was the only plan.
Wow, make it or break it. That's the
Yeah.
checkers or wreckers right there, boys. Good on you for sending that one.
Yeah, I mean, that's how you got to do it.
Okay, then. So, Evan, good on you for hustling up the mountain and keeping the restaurant open a little longer.
Slipping 2 chains
Yeah.
a $5.
Yeah.
yeah. 2 Chainz was
Blessed
the
be
man.
2 Chainz.
And those little brats. I remember those little brats too. Oh,
We hate North Carolina.
North Carolina.
Like, me too. I definitely, it sticks out in my mind. We ate, and I remember, like, you know, spending as long as we could in that restaurant. Like, they're closing up. They're like, finally, like, guys, like, you gotta get out of here. We got the vibe. And then I think the full on monsoon had like started at that point. If it hadn't, it was super windy. And I remember us just like kind of like pushing our bikes over to where the campground was and setting up camp there. We had some random campsite like, oh, cool. There's a bunch of wood here that's like completely soaked through. Me and Derek like gave a valiant effort to start that fire. I was like,
Yeah.
I can always start a fire. Like, it doesn't matter. And it was just like absolutely not happening that night.
You guys did give it the college try, though. I was impressed with your effort.
A team effort
Anything
to
for the
not
picture.
die.
It was not a team effort. I didn't help.
Graham did not help.
I did not help.
He was enjoying the whiskey, which, reading the story again, he's like, I had a good night's sleep that night. I was like, what? Who slept that night? Like, the tent was just like whap 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 whap. Like, are you asleep, Derek? No. Whap 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 whap.
And then Graham's over there in his whiskey-induced coma, just sleeping it away like a baby.
This is the wisdom you gain with age. You know,
Very true.
you drink yourself through the trauma. And then the next morning, they wouldn't let us, like, they gave us cups of coffee, but they wouldn't let us in the restaurant. There was something weird where they wouldn't let us eat breakfast.
No, I remember distinctly what happened. We packed up camp as quickly as we possibly could to get back inside the restaurant. And I think when we were packing up camp, it was just starting to really spit. Like the rain, it had been raining, but not nearly as hard as it was going to. And we booked it down at the restaurant, and they let us in, and we got coffee. We were standing by the window, like, so happy to be warm and dry for a moment. And somebody just walks up to it and says, "You guys have to leave. You can't stay here. You just have to go." And we said, "What? Why? Where do you want us to go?" It was torrential downpour at that point. And they're just like, "You just have to leave the building. You can't be in the building right now." And we were just dumbfounded. And I just remember saying, "Can I keep my coffee?" And they're like, "Yeah, you can keep your coffee, but you have to leave." And we stood out there on the porch for probably 30 to 45 minutes in the torrential downpour, just waiting for them to reopen.
That's right.
It was awful.
And so at what point did you guys muster up the courage to keep going?
I'm sure we tried to wait out the rain, but it was not going to happen.
No.
Because tornadoes aren't a common occurrence here in the mountains. They happen, but it doesn't happen a lot. But that's what was forecast for this day. So it was really crappy conditions that were not going to change in our favor.
Higher elevations are more prone for tornado strikes because of how tornadoes form.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so it's probably why they kicked you out. And it's probably why they shut the park down and stuff too.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
It's for our own safety.
Mm-hmm.
We're way safer on our bikes.
Way safer on your bikes. They just didn't want you as a liability.
Totally. I hear you. The parkway is abandoned, like end of days, zombie apocalypse kind of abandoned. Typically, this road is a barrage of douches and Porsches and families in RVs, particularly during fall. Today, we pedal for several miles and never see a car. This probably has something to do with the torrential rains and high winds we're experiencing. The monsoon-like conditions that tried to blow us off the road coming down Mount Mitchell have coated the pavement with a thick blanket of colorful leaves and broken tree branches. It feels more like we're pedaling a forgotten forest road than one of the most popular drives in America. There's heavy, cold rain falling and a thick fog that obscures all of the road's signature views. But so much rain has come down over the last 24 hours that the steep road-cut cliffs that flank the blacktop have turned into a series of waterfalls. It's as if the mountain is melting. The only way to reach the next trail system is by bushwhacking a mile through the woods. I spent days scouting the route, using topo maps and Google Earth, looking for the most casual grade between the parkway and a grassy road that runs at the top of Big Ivy. From that road, you can hit a handful of primitive downhill trails that drop 1,000 feet through a forest graced with boulders and the occasional cave. Big Ivy is an isolated piece of Pisgah that's only a half hour from downtown Asheville. It's closer than most of the legendary trails of Pisgah, but draws a fraction of the mountain bikers. Most people in Big Ivy are hunting or cooking meth. A handful of downhillers have discovered the area in the last few years because the trails are stupid steep and easy to shuttle. It's full riot gear kind of terrain. Some of the trails are just fall line paths down dried up creek beds, but a couple are more nuanced, offering contour between steep stretches plagued with baby heads and rutted out root systems. The only way into Big Ivy with a bike from the Blue Ridge Parkway is a hardy bushwhack. I'm saddle sore, so I'm pretty excited to get off my bike as we duck into the woods. The slope falls away from the parkway in a steep tangle of hardwoods, briars, and boulders. We know it's still raining, but we can barely feel it because the canopy is so thick. We follow a narrow gulch down the slope, dragging the back wheels of our bikes in hopes of creating a trail that we can follow the next day. It's steep, but not nearly as difficult as I was expecting, and it only takes 30 minutes to find the road that traverses the top of Big Ivy. We pedal through soggy, knee-high grass, like riding through a rice field, until we hit Bearpin, a 2-mile downhill with a surprising amount of flow, thanks to some well-placed berms and rollers built by Good Samaritans. It's slick and covered with fallen leaves when we hit it, but we ride fast and careless, hollering the whole way. Evan hits some of the more adventurous jumps, and I ride high on the muddy berms, actually surprised when my tires stick to the wall. It's carefree, like being a kid again. Our cave for the night is a peach, creekfront real estate with tall ceilings and plenty of floor space. Even better, I pre-stocked it with whiskey, beer, and dry wood. When the wind is blowing rain sideways and you're stuck in a cave, you're obligated to drink. We hang a line to dry our clothes and eat ramen noodles with sporks huddled by the fire. The creek is a few feet from the mouth of the cave, and it's rising, just a few inches at a time, but the rain is relentless. Salamanders scurry for dry ground. Every once in a while, we'll hear a loud crack and feel the ground shake from trees snapping in the wind. Then the lightning starts, big flashes that light up the entire forest on the other side of the creek. It's beautiful and scary as shit. We sit there in silence, watching the lights show as we fall asleep, vaguely worried about a flash flood washing us away. It's going to be a shitty ride in the morning if this weather keeps up.
How did you go about navigating this bushwhack down to Big Ivy?
I spent a lot of time looking at the maps and then driving the road to find the spot between mile markers that we needed to drop down. So I knew if we dropped, I can't remember the exact mile markers, but within like a half mile of, so-and-so mile marker, that we would, if we stayed straight down the fall line, we would hit that grassy road that runs at the top of Big Ivy and sort of connects everything from the top of the system. But I didn't know how long it was going to take us. It looked okay on the map, but, you just never really know.
That can be very deceiving.
Yeah. And also what people who, if you've never bushwhacked in the Southern Appalachians, you cannot understand just how much of a jungle it is down here. Like it could have been a gentle slope, but we could have hit like a field of roto that would have been a no-go with our bikes on our backs. Like we would have just had to turn around.
Oh yeah, that'd have been a hard no.
Yeah. So I think we got really lucky in that respect. And it's wicked smart of us to try to leave a trail for us to follow the next day when we had to retrace our steps back up the parkway by dragging our brakes. I don't know which one of you thought of that, but that was pretty smart.
Yeah, I don't know. That was a good map read though. That was like a super legit connection, and we were very blessed with pretty open strand of forest there.
Yeah.
Like it definitely had some like ankle breaker moments with like some hidden rocks like kind of wrapped in roots and stuff. Like if you weren't paying attention, you could have messed up, but for the most part, like it was pretty clear through that section.
Let's also reflect on the fact that like this is probably the brightest moment of the trip, is picking a solid bushwhack line. I don't want to like color this as like, oh, it's all sunny and rosy here. It had been dumping buckets on us down the parkway. I mean, I have photographs of every little fissure and crevice in the road cuts as raging waterfalls.
Yeah.
And the gutters on either side of the road, just like white water, like just rivers running down either side of us. And I mean, it was raining insanely hard. I've never been in such hard driving rain anywhere in my life. And I've backpacked and been out in the wilderness quite a bit in my life, and that was probably the worst rain I've ever been in, from like that morning till I guess the following morning.
Yeah, solid 24 hours.
Yeah.
When you're on the parkway and you're just driving along and you see these like chutes that are, 95% of the year are completely dry and they're rock chutes, and you're like, yeah, I wonder how that got there. And then the day that we were there, we were like, oh, those are creeks. Like that is a creek right now. Like that's why there's no soil there. That's why there's a rock chute right there. It was unbelievable how much water was coming off the mountain.
I was bummed that your photos of the waterfalls on the parkway didn't make it in the magazine, because like I can't remember how many times I've been on the parkway. I can't count that high, and I've never seen it like that. Like that was insane.
Derek, were you going to mention about the stress you were feeling about the lenses and the quality of those that morning, or what happened to those lenses while you were trying to shoot those waterfalls, and why those pictures aren't in the magazine?
Well, right, yeah. So the pictures are not in the magazine for a couple of. Well, the main reason is the camera just wouldn't focus, and I couldn't manually focus the camera. It was raining so hard. I always carry not a roll, but I carry quite a few trash bags with me so that I can snip a hole in them and waterproof my camera gear if I need to pull it out in the rain. But it was raining so hard that my bag was soaked through, and it would have gotten my camera gear even more wet if I tried to take it out, put it in a trash bag. So I was just whipping it out of my bag, my camera bag, and trying to get a couple pictures and then throwing it right back in the bag in hopes to completely, reduce the amount of time it was in the water and in the rain. And I think we stopped to shoot once, maybe twice on the parkway, and it completely waterlogged my camera. And we'll talk about this probably later, but my lenses they had water in them, like straight up. I had water in the inner elements of all of my lenses, which are all zoom lenses. I wasn't carrying primes with me because it was just too heavy. So all of my glass was essentially just waterlogged from that point forward, which was, oh my God, so stressful and so awful. I mean, just again, reflecting at the back, this is like a big break for me to shoot a feature for Bike Magazine, and there was a really strong possibility the camera was not going to work for the rest of the trip, like a very strong possibility.
So you had some expensive extra water bottles with you.
Yeah, exactly. That I couldn't drink. Couldn't even drink that water.
So when you guys got down to the cave, what was that scene like? Set that scene for me, Graham.
So Big Ivy has a few different caves that are really just sort of granite overhangs, but you're surrounded on three sides by rocks. So they feel like legit caves. I think one of them, maybe even this one, was in the Hunger Games, right? Did I make that up, guys?
Nope, you're
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, okay. There you go. Were we there first?
Nope.
Damn
No.
it.
Nah.
Okay, fine. Anyway, so it's a very cool cave. It's pretty spacious. Climbers love it because there's some super hard bouldering on the underside of the cave, but it sits right next to a creek, which typically is just a nice, pleasant trickle. On this particular evening, it was not a trickle, and it just kept rising on us, which was scary as hell.
Oh,
Yeah, but
so it's like a
Yeah.
rising creek right at your feet.
yeah, it's the Johnny Cash song for sure. But Derek and I had scouted this spot before, right? Like we went out there with your truck and my dog and my kids.
Yeah.
And we made sure it was going to photograph well for you.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, and we brought some wood.
Yep. That's
Couple,
right.
couple provisions.
You guys pre-stocked the cave a little bit then.
We did. And on that, so I did a Pisgah bikepacking trip for Bike Magazine a few years before this, and that was my move. Each campsite, I would leave beer and wood and some food stashed like in the bushes so that we would ride up and have like this just wonderful evening ahead of us. So that's what we did for this cave, and it was a very pleasant stay.
So you had fire this time. Evan, did you get a fire going?
We had a fire. Yeah, it was nice.
And Derek, at this point, what's your camera gear looking like?
It's awful. It's awful. I am to the point where we are essentially in the scene that should be the opening spread of the story. We have an incredible fall scene with a boulder, a fire going, bikes. It's just like an amazing camp scene. But my lenses are so fogged that anything that is showing highlight, so the sky, the fire, even something as dim as just like the creek rolling through, is just a foggy mess from the condensation on the inner elements of the lens. So I'm shooting furiously with all my lenses, trying to figure out how I can capture something that doesn't look like there's just exploding lens flare and fog coming out of every highlight in the frame, and it's impossible. So I was freaking out. Freaking out.
I mean, in the article here, we have this one photo of Evan and Graham under the rock with the fire going.
Yeah. Yeah,
We
that's
do. That one came out okay. I'm telling you, and I have, I still have every single photograph I captured on this trip. I shot, I think, 4,300 pictures.
Jesus.
Oh,
And there's a strong percentage from the camp scene where I had the guys go on top of the rock. They were under the rock. They were
Yeah.
to the side of the rock. I mean, we did, while we had daylight, we shot kind of like a lifestyle camping scene, because at that point, I think with the original trip planned, we were going to go ride the trails in Big Ivy. And we were just so waterlogged, so beat down that we just didn't want to ride our bikes at all.
Yeah.
So this was the alternative. There was nothing else to do. I mean, we were just standing around, drinking a little bit of whiskey and trying to thaw out by, a pretty small fire.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. We were supposed to hit pretty much every decent downhill in Big Ivy that day. We were going to do laps, but we didn't.
But we didn't.
We did not.
that wasn't even like a thought that would have worked out at all. We got, once we like were riding down, we did the bushwhack and came down. It was like, oh, everything is completely soaking wet. Like the trails had creeks through them. It was just bizarre how wet it could be.
Maximum saturation.
And I didn't even know, but it hadn't even started raining as hard as it was going to rain that day. That was like the chill part.
It was sprinkling compared to what happened that night.
Yeah.
Derek, you mentioned the opening spread, like what you envisioned for the opening spread. You guys might not have the magazine in front of you, but the opening spread is not that lifestyle camping scene you described.
Not even close.
Can you describe what that opening spread is?
So that opening spread is us leaving the Mount Mitchell restaurant after our dinner there, after climbing up the road. And it is a blurry, miserable, we're just getting on the saddle to cruise down to the campsite. And, Evan's got his headlamp on. I don't think you do. It was just, I guess it's a good reflection to remember. I mean, throughout all of this, I'm photographing everything. There is nothing here that I am just saying, okay, no, this is good. Like, I'm shooting literally everything we're doing, regardless of the weather. So that's why I have so many pictures, and that only a few of these ran. But I have probably 7 other stories worth of pictures from this one trip on my computer.
That's why I love working with Derek, because he does a really great job of capturing like the tone of the adventure. And this opening spread is so blue and dark and ominous. Like, it's perfect.
I know Derek, and we kind of shot, we kind of, did the work of the afternoon, and it's like later in the day, the storm's starting to pick up a little bit. We're sitting in the cave, like kind of getting antsy, drinking whiskey. Like, all right, we've been looking at this fire and staying out of the rain in this 15 by 15 foot space for a little bit. And I'm like trying to get out and like, check out other stuff and see what's going on, just like in the vicinity of our campground. And I think I'm up above the cave that we're on, and like I look up the mountain or up the valley, and I see just like, it reminded me of like Jurassic Park, like the T-Rex coming through the forest. Like the tips of the trees are just shaking violently. And I think I run back down, like almost bust my ass coming back into the cave. Derek and Graham look at me like, what's going on, dude? And the only way I can describe it is that I was witnessing like a microburst. Like maybe Mangler knows like
Yeah.
more about what those are, but it's like a micro storm, like almost a tornado, is like coming down the valley. And as soon as I get into the cave, this just like immense gust of wind blasts through the cave and through the valley. And I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Like, are we in a tornado right now? And yeah, that was just like, I'll never forget that part of that trip, because I was like, oh crap, this might actually be dangerous now. Like, maybe we shouldn't be here anymore.
So, I remember that too, because I remember hearing trees crashing like
Yep.
through the valley
Yep.
that we were in,
Yeah.
which was terrifying in and of itself, you know. But I think shortly after that, I remember Graham saying, "Oh yeah, but by the way, my buddy's coming with pizza."
That's
Wait,
true.
really?
Which
And I was like, "No way! There's no way your friend's coming out here." He's like, "Yeah, he is. He's a good friend of mine. He's coming out with pizza and beer for us."
Yes.
did not make it in the story.
Correct.
Yeah, but it happened.
So tell me about this. Tell me about this pizza and beer delivery. I mean, that's quite the Domino's delivery driver.
Yeah. This is a good buddy of mine named Keener, who up to this point typically went on all of my adventures with me. Like if I had a good project for an article for a magazine, like he was who I dragged along. But at this point in our lives, some of my friends started aging out of these kinds of escapades. And so he didn't want to come along for the actual action, but I convinced him to show up
Please
And
come
then-
hang out.
in the middle of it. Yeah, hang out and bring some food and some booze so that we can enjoy ourselves in the middle of this sufferfest. And he did, man. He showed up. He drove out in a storm with hot pizza and some beer. He didn't want to hang out. He dropped off the provisions and then split because it was so sketchy. But
No,
he
what-
brought us the goods.
What happened was, I don't know how you guys were communicating, but he drove to a point and then never showed up. And we're like, well, what happened to the dude? So we like go down the road and there's a massive tree that had fallen into the road and he couldn't get past it.
That's right.
Oh.
So he was stuck on the other side of that tree.
That's right. Yep.
I don't know. I think if I recall correctly, they got out, walked up to our campsite because it wasn't far down the road, hung out for a quick minute,
Yeah.
and then they left, and then came back because another tree fell on the other side, like on the way out. Remember, we had to go
That's
down
right.
there and move the
yeah.
tree out of the
right.
road. So Keener and he brought his daughter with him.
Yeah.
So he and his daughter could leave the forest that night.
That's right. Yep.
So they weren't stuck in a cave with you all night in a rising creek.
It's very, very close. Very close. That's right. He got sandwiched by two trees. I forgot all about that.
Oh, wow. That's right.
So there's plenty of material for a B story here, Derek. We get your extra photos, all this extra content, and we just run a behind the scenes story. Anyone would publish it.
I think so.
Anybody.
Anybody.
Maybe a podcast would publish it.
Maybe a podcast.
I still have the photo that Derek has of like my packed out Da Vinci Troy in the cave that night. There's a fire and he like, had his camera out at all times and has a photo of like a lightning bolt lighting up the forest behind my bike. And I was just like, there's a lot of lightning when you're catching an image like that.
So Derek, also you were taking this time in the cave to do some hopeful camera repairs.
Yeah, I did that night. I was essentially out of options. I had dried the outer elements of my camera 1,000 times with my clothes, probably these other guys' clothes, and nothing was going to dry it. So the last resort I had was to put my camera lenses by the fire. So I lined up my 16-35, my 24-70, my 70-200 with the camera body attached to it on the fire ring, like probably, I don't know, 3 inches from the flame.
Damn.
I mean,
And-
to those people that are listening, we're talking close to almost 20 grand in camera goodies.
Yeah.
Yeah. just cooking at a campfire. No big deal.
Yeah, there was nothing else to do. I mean, I figured the heat might, I don't know, might evaporate some of the water. I have no idea. But that was the only option. And it didn't. Let's be clear. It didn't. But
So you just had your camera lenses full of hot water.
yeah, exactly.
And steam.
Exactly. But thankfully they all still worked. I mean, the electronics worked. They were fine, but optically speaking, they weren't ideal, but they got the job done. So.
Derek, I don't want to steal your thunder, but my notebook got soggy a little bit. That was a problem for me.
Bummer.
I lost like 3 pages in my notebook to the rain.
Wait, were they written pages?
No, thankfully, no. They were blank. Still, there's a lot of potential in those 3 pages. Just down the drain.
He had to constrict the amount that he wrote because of that. Like,
Exactly.
I had to condense it. You never know what could have been
There's
written
a lot
on those
of
pages.
There's a lot of spirit animals that didn't go recorded because I lost those pages.
I mean, the people are building this mental image of this cave while Derek is, and maybe this is after Derek took his lens off the fire heater dehumidifier setup, but our fire ring became an island because the creek rose to the point of coming into our cave. And it was one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen, is to have like a fire you built on dry land, have the water rise to the point where your fire has become an island. And then you can't stand as close as you want or your feet will be wet.
You guys played that really cool throughout the night. There was a point where I was like, fuck this. I'm going to go look for another spot on higher ground to see if there's a dry place where I could sleep elsewhere, because we're going to drown if we stay here in this cave. But you guys were like, no, it's fine. It's going to be all right.
Dude, that broke me. We were... or the water came around the fire pit, and I was like, that's pretty cool. Like, I can hang. I'm on this little dirt ledge in my sleeping bag. Like, I'm still under the cave and I'm still dry. And I remember looking down and watching the formation of a creek under my sleeping pad that is now coming from under the cave in the rock behind me and flowing under my sleeping pad and filling up the lake even more. And I was like, dude, I don't know about this, man. This is bullshit. Like, what? Like, now I'm going to roll around in this red mud in my sleeping bag, and God.
Well, you played it cool.
It's
cool.
It's
Glad
also
it came out
important
that
to
way.
know that I think that also Graham is was painting this creek right next to the cave, and it was next to the cave, but it's probably, I'm looking at these pictures, I'm estimating, 6 to 8 feet beneath us
at least,
at normal flow rate.
Yeah.
So
Holy
it
shit.
rose so high, so fast that, I can remember looking at it and thinking, there's no way this thing's ever going to rise and come close to us.
No,
And-
never. That creek's not a problem to where I'm going to sleep tonight.
And now it's knocking on your butt.
Yeah.
Jeez.
And you guys were still fairly high up in Big Ivy, right?
No, I think this cave is...
You were above Corner Rock, right?
Yeah, we are above Corner Rock for sure. So it's like in the middle of Big Ivy.
Yeah. So just imagine the creeks down below.
Oh yeah, man. I'm sure that main creek that goes through there was like way high, because all of these trails that are on dry creek beds, I bet were raging creeks that day. The ones that we were going to try to ride, we would have needed rafts, because
You'd have brought the wrong toys for that day.
Totally. I stumble out of the cave early the next morning, my back stiff from sleeping on the ground, and behold a miracle. Blue sky. We warm our clothes by the fire, eat Pop-Tarts, and get after it, our chains grinding with rust as we retrace our path out of Big Ivy. There's no easy way to bushwhack up a mountain with a bike. I I try putting it over my shoulder, cyclocross style. I try pushing it in front of me. I try pulling it. It all sucks. But we make it through the mile-long bushwhack, climbing a massive boulder on the edge of the parkway to bag a view that stretches into Tennessee. The blue sky makes us giddy as we put in fast road miles on the way back to Heartbreak, which will ride in the correct direction this time, finishing the 3-day adventure with what might be the sweetest downhill in all of Pisgah. It doesn't feel like the end of days anymore. The tourists are out and the miles are easy. We take turns drafting, and Derek teaches us a road trip game he used to play in college, where you insert anal at the beginning of every RV name you see. RVs have cheesy names like Rambler or Cougar, so every time one passes us, Evan or Derek will shout out, "Anal Rambler" or "Anal Adventurer." A bunch of creepy hunting cabins line the gravel road that connects the parkway to the top of Heartbreak. One old camper has lawn furniture out front, which seems like as good a place as any to take a nip from the flask before hitting the long descent. The first pitch is steep and rocky, but nothing too technical. Derek goes, Evan goes, then I go. It happens in slow motion, the front tire getting stuck behind a rock that's just a little too big, me going over the handlebars and saying, "Oh shit." I hit hard on my right elbow, breaking it wide open, and catch the rest of my body with my left hand, which dislocates my shoulder. There's some more screaming, and a few minutes when it's just me and the pain enveloped in that strange white world. I sit there waiting to pass out, but it never happens. Eventually, Evan and Derek make their way back to me, their faces cartoonish as they pop into my narrowing field of vision. They're talking, but I can't hear them. So I just sit there, soaking in the pain until I can hear and see again. "You don't look good," Derek says. My shoulder is hanging low. He wants to know if I hit my head. We talk about calling in a rescue, but that sounds expensive. So I decide to try to pop my shoulder back in, making a big windmill motion with my left arm, which causes me to almost pass out again. The only thing to do is get down the trail. I walk slowly at first, then faster, until eventually I'm riding through the pink carpet on skinny ridgeline single track, holding the handlebars mostly with my right hand. I'm ginger about it, walking anything sketchy. Thankfully, Heartbreak isn't too gnarly. There are a couple of fall line patches, some tight switchbacks, but mostly it's beautiful, rooty trail that contours along the ridge for miles. It's true single track, not a road conversion like the majority of trails in Pisgah. At one point, the corridor is so narrow that handlebars have scraped divots out of 2 trees straddling the trail. A patch of gnar punctuates the bottom of the trail, right before a river crossing. A long root garden at the base of a tree leads into a series of drops before finishing with an off-camber slab. Derek gets a shot of Evan hugging close to the tree and hopping the last boulder. And then the adventure's over. All that's left is a trip to the hospital.
Man, so what a way to send off the trip.
Yeah, so, I mean, so day three, right? The sun is shining. We're in good moods. We're thinking all this suffering is going to pay off with this awesome downhill on Heartbreak, which is super fun. That's not the way it turned out at all. At all. That was painful.
Oh my God.
You heard Graham's account of the injury. That is, oh my God! It was one of the craziest things I've ever seen in the backcountry. So basically, I hear him say, "Oh shit!" Immediately get off my bike, run back up, and he's just crumpled on the ground. Or actually, I think you were sitting back up at that point, just gazing into nothing. And I think I then yelled down to you, Evan. You came back up, and we were both kind of assessing the situation. You definitely, yeah, it was your left arm, that's right?
Yeah, left shoulder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he hit his left shoulder, but he also hit his elbow and put a gouge in his elbow to the bone.
Yeah.
So there's all
you can
this
see
blood.
bone.
Yeah.
There wasn't much blood, actually.
Oh, one of
randomly.
those.
I don't know why, but I have a picture of his bone.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you know, through a hole in his arm. And he's sitting there, and Evan and I are trying to talk to him, and not only is he gazing into nothing, he's starting to seize. He's having seizures on the trail.
Oh shit.
And
I forgot
Evan and
about
I
that.
at that point were like, fuck this. We are getting out of here. We're going to walk up to the parkway. We're going to get him in a car and we're going to get him out of here. And Graham's like, oh no, I always seize. I mean, it was like a regular occurrence for you. And I guess I bought it. I don't know, but
We did not want to buy it.
no, thank you for saying that. Exactly. And so yeah, you seized a little bit, and then I had taken a wilderness first responder, I don't know, 10 years prior, so I was way out of practice with assessing shoulder injuries, but it looked low, like, and you weren't moving it, so I figured it was out. And from what I could remember, you take the arm that was separated, and you bring your hand back like a throwing motion to hopefully click it back in, which sounds awful, but I think it's the most painless way to do it. So I described that to him, what he needed to do. And Graham stands up and just throws a windmill with his busted shoulder. Immediately collapses to the ground and maybe seized again.
Yeah.
And then came back to and was like, we're finishing this story. This is not going to end with me getting evacuated out of here. And it probably was, arguably one of my poorest judgments in the forest, to allow you to keep riding. But we did.
I mean, he didn't die.
No, he bumped his way down there. I mean, the photographs of him, his helmet's on sideways. He's just like, looks like he's about to vomit the whole way down the trail,
Casper the Friendly Ghost, like all the blood is out of his face.
Yeah. Just, I mean, a feat of, I don't know, courageous, just courage. I could not believe it. I mean, I don't know that I would have ridden out of there, but boy, he did it.
It was unbelievable to watch, like, because we heard the crash. We looked back up. Graham is full 1,000-yard stare. He goes through, like, kind of comes to and starts hearing us. And I think me and Derek are like taking steps back and like discussing this. Like, yeah, all right, we're pretty close to the top. Like, we can get somebody in a car pretty soon. Like, let's just take this easy. And then meanwhile, Graham is like, he's like coming out of the 1,000-yard stare. He's like, okay, like, I just got to get this shoulder back in and I'm good to go. Like, I'm ready to ride after this. And I think, like, to pick up where Derek left off, like, he does the baseball throwing motion to get his shoulder back in, which, I mean, if it didn't make Graham puke, it almost made me puke, like, seeing his reaction. And he sits down, comes back to again. He's like, okay, that might be better. And then we're like, okay, like, I guess we're doing this. We're going down the hill. Like, Graham's gonna, like, he's gonna push his bike for a bit and see where we're going. And me and Derek we're gonna kind of keep riding through on the trail and try to get some photos. And we'll go a little bit and then let Graham catch up to us. And we go a little bit further and we're like waiting for Graham. Like, all right, where is he at? And then, dude, sure as shit, he's fucking riding now. Like, he comes around that turn. We're like, no way, Graham's riding. And he's like, yeah, like, I think I'm feeling pretty good. My shoulder's back in. He's like, I think this finger's broken, though. Like, I didn't notice that, but I think, am I right, Graham? Did you have a broken finger, too?
I don't know that I broke a finger. I'm sure it hurt
Something
like
was
a mother.
weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, I was not in a proper state of mind.
Obviously not.
When you guys came up to me, like, it's a very strange feeling to be in that sort of bubble where I could kind of see you guys, could not hear a fucking word y'all were saying. Like, it was so surreal, particularly since when I was taking nips off the whiskey flask at the Hunter's trailer cabin kind of thing, I was in such a good mood because it was all going so well. Finally, you know, we were going to get that descent that we all earned. And then to go so south so fast was disappointing, to say the least.
I mean, I will say this about upper Heartbreak, that section below where the trailers used to be. It can sneak up on you. It's got some holes in there, and you got to go at that a little cautiously, especially after you guys have been getting your asses kicked for 2 days. You're probably a little fatigued.
Nah, I think about that particular accident a lot, and I blame two things. One, I was being too cautious. Like, I should have just let it go instead of feathering the brakes through that chunky top section, right?
Yeah.
And two, my bike that I used for this trip was a super light carbon cross country bike that basically had an inverted fork. Like, everything is slack now. Like, this fork came back into my crotch, so it just made you want to go over the handlebars. Like, I got rid of that bike shortly after this trip because I blame that bike and my poor riding in that section for this accident.
You go to the hospital. What all do you rack up?
I mean, I only went for the dislocated shoulder. I honestly don't remember any conversation about seizures. Like, this is the first I've heard of this. I have had them in the past, but not from like head trauma or anything. So I just go for my shoulder and just to get that checked out. And yeah, it was dislocated, but I just wore a
sling.
Wore a sling. Like, it wasn't the first time or the last time I've dislocated that shoulder. So.
Ooh, yeah. And got that elbow sewed up?
The scar is still there. I don't remember them. I guess they probably sewed it up if you could see bone. I remember that photo though, Derek. That was fucking gnarly.
Yeah.
I would like to use that as my my shot for my social media if you want to send that to me.
Sure.
Your new default.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
How do you guys, other than Graham stacking it up, but then coming through and riding out the rest of the trip, I mean, you got your reward. You got your heartbreak finish.
I guess. And we got some great pictures of that down too with Evan, which worked out really nicely too. It was also a little bit nerve-wracking from a photography standpoint in the sense that that storm just, ripped all the colors off the leaves too. There was not much to work with on the way down.
Oh
On
yeah.
the way up.
Yeah, you had leaf season going into it.
Yeah, it was peak perfect color on going in, and on the way out it was just green down low and bare up top.
I remember at one point, Evan, I made you, like, in the middle of the downhill after dislocating my shoulder. I got a fucking flat tire, and I made Evan change it for me.
That's right. That's right.
I was like, I could do this with one arm, but it's going to take me a while. Evan, I bet you're really good at this.
I fixed it, man.
You did in record time. NASCAR shit.
Yeah.
We had a bond forming at that point. Like, we were getting out of there. I think we had like a pretty killer ride down. From what I remember, like, it wasn't raining, and I think we came into some like really crazy sections of trail where, though all the leaves had blown down, it had made like these red carpets of leaves on the trail, which was like pretty surreal to ride through, like before any tire tracks had been through those yet. So it's just like, whoa, okay, here's a silver lining in this, all the leaves being on the ground. Like, they're making the yellow brick road but red.
Getting some fresh tracks.
Yeah.
Yep, leaf loam.
That's the only loam we can get out here. Well, Derek, looking back on this assignment, how do you think you came through as a hired photographer?
I feel like I think I did pretty well. I was pretty excited with what I came out in terms of content. I think, I'm sure pretty much everybody does this in their profession, but you always strive for better, and there's probably a handful of pictures I really wish I had, And I think a lot of that, quite frankly, was due to the moisture. Like I was there capturing them. I just like electronically, and it just wasn't working. I just couldn't get the gear to work. And there's argument to be said that I shouldn't have let that happen in the first place. But that was the trip. I mean, I think that pretty much sums it up. My camera gear survived. We survived, but it was hell, man. It really was.
So did your pay for the job cover your bill from Canon Services? Yeah.
I might have broken even if I was lucky.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Hell no.
Oh man, but I'd do it again.
Yeah. Evan, would you do it again?
I mean, like, after telling the story, you would think I would say no, but the answer is like absolutely yes. Like, I can't even recall how many times I've like been sitting around a campfire and told this story. Like,
Right.
It's absurd. Every moment of it is absurd, and I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen Derek or Graham very much since we probably did that story, but there's like a bond there now that's like, all right, if I see these guys, we're gonna hang out and have a couple beers and see how everybody's doing.
Yeah.
I think now I call it fear bonding, but I guess that trip would be like suffer bonding.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like once you go through that with somebody, like, man, it's cemented in there pretty good. You got that one forever with those guys.
Yeah, I think it's good when you can have some sort of suffer or fear bonding type of experience with at least one or most of all of your friends.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, friendships don't count until you do shit like this with them.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely.
This was a good one. This is fun because it was in our backyard, which at that time didn't get a ton of national media attention. So it was fun to shine a spotlight on these areas that now, 5-6 years later, are definitely better known and are changing. I think for the better, but they're changing. It's difficult to read. Like, I typically don't reread the articles I write after they're published. That's really hard to do.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like I would have changed some words.
Just a couple.
Just a couple of words. 4 words. I would have changed 4 words in here. But it's really fun to relive this because it's really cool to hear Derek and Evan's perspective of this story that lived in my own head for so long, like coming up with the idea and then writing it and seeing it come to life. Like, it's really, really cool for me as a writer to hear other perspectives on this adventure. That's been super fun.
And that was kind of my idea for this episode here, was to get a writer, photographer, and the athlete in on a conversation about an article that they were part of, to kind of hear more of the backstory about it, because there are so many pieces of this story that happened that you had a word count essentially, and you had to keep it below a certain threshold, and also you lost a couple of pages of your notebook, so there was that.
Yeah.
But it's cool to hear the backstory on how all this came about.
I think the backstory is usually the better story.
Yeah.
Right.
Like we produce what we can and we do our best, but like all of this stuff that goes into that production is super cool, really fun, and the people that are involved it's just great.
And what's interesting about the process is once we create the content, we punt it to an editor who wasn't there. So they read the story, they look at the photographs, and they take the pictures they think tell the story, the best from the entire edit that I send. And so like I said, maybe what could be fun too is I'd be happy to post, 10 or so images from the trip when this podcast posts, so that some people can come and enjoy some behind the scenes pictures.
That'd be really cool.
That'd be awesome.
Graham's elbow bone
I want to see
or
that.
I'm not
my
looking at that
lenses
one.
around the fire.
I love the Pop-Tart shot. You got a shot of Evan cooking Pop-Tarts around the fire in the cave. That's great.
We got that. I do have some blurry images of, the raging waterfalls in the parkway that I can certainly share. All of the images that, were not published in this wonderful little piece.
Do you remember how many photos you submitted to Bike for this?
So this particular assignment, like I said, was my first one with them, and the editor, was a little reluctant just because it was the first time they'd ever really worked with me, and they were sending me out on a feature.
Derek, who was the photo editor for this one?
At that time, it was Anthony.
Okay.
Anthony Smith, yeah. And he was great. We got on the phone, we talked about it. He's like, man, I want you to shoot everything, and I want you to send me everything. So I took out all the images that were out of focus, and maybe not even very many of them, and I sent him 2 hard drives in the mail, 4,300 images, and he looked through them all and chose, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 10 images. Sorry, 12 images or so out of that.
Damn, Anthony.
Hard workers over there at Bike.
But let's talk. Like, this is crazy because 10 images, but you got a full spread at the beginning, so that's 2 pages. You got another 1 page of us. Like, there's some really large photos in here, and this is what Bike did better than any other magazine that I've worked with personally. Is they will give a story space. Like, if Derek turns in some kick-ass photos, they will find the space for it. If I can do a good job with a story that's assigned at 3,000 words, but I turn it at 4,500 and they like it, they'll find the space for that. No other magazine that I've worked with did that like Bike did that, And that's what made them so fun to work with. Like, they gave a shit about the story, It wasn't just about filling space. Yeah, it was great. Like, I can't tell you how many times I would turn in a story and double the word count that was assigned. And I would be like, I'm really sorry. I had a lot of fun. This is what I got. And if the photographer did a good job, then it would run at full length, I
That's
miss
good to
Bike.
know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Dude, Bike was the best.
Oh, yeah, I've never heard that from the writing and the photography perspective from you guys. Like, hearing that is cool. How much respect you have for how that article is put together in the final piece. Like, that's sick. I had no idea you sent 2 hard drives worth of photos. Yeah,
in the
that's
mail.
just absurd. That's
Yeah.
absurd.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
it is absurd. I mean, you have to understand too. It goes back to the conversation I had with Anthony before the story ran. He said, I want to see everything. I want to see everything that you photographed, because he cared about this story. I mean, there was nothing out there like this before we did this. Nobody was doing crazy bike packing trips out of their backyard. At least they were making it into magazines. Potentially people were doing it out there, but he was excited about it. I was excited about it, so I wasn't going to short him. I was going to stay true to my word, and by God, I shot a lot of pictures. I really did.
For reference, Derek, so this was your first feature project for Bike, and you submitted like 4,000 plus pictures or whatever on 2 hard drives. What was the most recent project? How many photos did you send them?
For Bike, I'd have to double check, but I think it was right around, it was between 600 and 700.
Oh, wow. So still turning a ton of photos for an assignment.
Yeah. After working with the publication, they, or really any client, they'll trust your editing and your calling skills to, submit the exact, peak of a moment, a turn or a jump or whatever, and they'll leave that to me, But, for this first one, no, I sent them everything, and I'm not sure that I even shoot quite that much still. I probably still shoot a lot, but
The A9 fires off quite a few frames a second.
it does. Yeah, it does. So we edit those down a little bit, but yeah.
Also, Derek, when you're shooting me in action shots, like it's hard not to just keep your finger on the trigger, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
You never know what you're going to get. Maybe get a dislocated shoulder windmill.
Listen, Michael, you've been there and shoots with me. You know my role. I ride in the background and let people like you. I'm there for scale. That's what I'm there for.
This rock roll is 1 gram tall. I have read this article many times, and I've tried to picture Graham's voice reading it while I've read the article, but actually having him here and listening to him read it was just like 100%. That was awesome. So thanks for doing that, Graham, and Mangler, thanks for, putting this all together, because I think it's a cool story that has, a lot of different perspectives, and yeah, thanks.
Glad you guys were down to be a part of this. And Graham, thank you for reaching out to the powers that be, getting okay for this to happen.
Yeah, thanks for letting us do it, Michael. This is awesome.
We hope you guys enjoyed story time with us on this week's episode. Derek will be posting some of the mentioned but not published photos, and we're going to be linking to that in the show notes. And maybe you still have a digital subscription to Bike Mag. If so, go check out the article. As for the weather for this week, who cares? We're getting our daylight back, and that's enough to be psyched about. So definitely make sure you spring your clocks forward this weekend, and that's a wrap on this episode. As always, you can find us on social media. Just search Pisgah Podcast. And if you ever stopped at the top of Upper Heartbreak, had a snack, and thought that it was smooth sailing from there on out, then go ahead and click that subscribe button, share with your friends, rate and review on iTunes.